She threw out a vase that was worth 12 milos. They had a spotlight on her, a headset mic curved like a question mark along her cheek, and my living room had been turned into a stage. The wallpaper I'd lived with for 29 years was gone. The rugs rolled away like old habits. Sloane, my daughter-in-law with a bright white smile and tan, so even it had to be airbrushed, raised her champagne flute to the donors clustered under the rented chandeliers. "And it's not just about taste, y'all," she was saying, one hand on the brass bar cart she'd dragged into my bay window. "It's about letting go of the past. Sometimes you have to throw out the old to make room for the life you deserve." A ripple of applause. My son, Grant, stood off to the side, laughing along with two men in navy sport coats. He looked tired and proud, and a little out of his depth. That made two of us. I stood up from the back row of my own house, and I said 3 words into my own microphone that nobody expected to hear from the retired art teacher in the linen jacket. "Play the video." Everything stopped. The donors. The band those interns had squeezed into my den. Even the caterer in the kitchen paused mid-ladle, tomato bisque trembling like it understood what was coming. On the screen behind Sloane, a black and white image sputtered to life. The exact curve of my driveway at 2:13 a.m. The soft glow of my motion light painting 2 figures in long shadows. One of them, tall, sharp elbows, baseball cap flipped backwards, had his hands underneath the pale blue curves of a vase. A second figure, smaller, ponytail, was hissing, "Careful, careful," as they eased the vase into the back of a Range Rover. Zoom, license plate. The timestamp burned in quiet, merciless numerals. Sloane blinked. Someone laughed in all the wrong places. She turned, just a little, her smile cracking. It was the kind of crack you could slip a truth through. Before I rewind, tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Nora Beth Callahan, and this happened in Magnolia Bluff, South Carolina. Drop your city in the comments. This one had me calling every neighbor on my block. Now let me take you back to how we got here. 8 months earlier. I was 67 when this started, old enough to know better, and young enough to let my heart tug on me anyway. The live oaks that line Live Oak Street, and don't ask me how many times tourists have smiled at that name, were still green, cicadas playing their summer violins whenever the humidity hit just right. I'd been retired from teaching art at Magnolia Bluff High for 6 years, and I'd finally stopped checking my watch around 3:10 p.m., when the kids used to flood the hallways. You can take the teacher out of the school, but it takes time to let the bell out of your bones. My days, if we're being honest, looked like this. I brewed coffee that pulled newspaper ink off my fingers, texted my sister Daisy about a sale on hydrangeas, watered the gardenias, wiped down the kitchen counters out of habit, and sometimes, if I was feeling brave, I'd lift the cotton cloth off the vase by the window and let the late light find it. It was a tall thing, delicate and ridiculous, powder blue like a May sky before a storm. Its body was covered in tiny, careful paintings, peaches and bats, and a tangle of vines so thin the brush must have trembled. I didn't know what kind of hands had made it, but I knew it had required patience. My mother had found it in 1974 at an estate sale up in New York, when she was still wearing her hair in a twist and calling me Nell, even though my name is Nora. She'd paid $20 for it and stuck the receipt in a cookbook where she figured no man who came along would ever look. My mother was a library of small secrets. I told my students that the objects we live with are just as real as the stories we tell. The vase was my mother humming in the kitchen when it was hot, my father coming in from mowing, my husband Jack bringing me a glass of water and tapping the rim twice with his fingernail like a ritual. When Jack died 8 years ago, the vase looked ridiculous. When I stopped crying in the shower and started to scrape my hair into a ponytail and go back out into our backyard to deadhead the roses, the vase looked brave. That's the thing about grief. It turns the light in your house different. I know what you're thinking. If it was worth $12 million, you must have known, right? I didn't. Not in dollars. Not till later. I knew it was mine. I knew it mattered. My son, Grant, married Sloane Whitford on a sticky September Saturday 3 years ago, while she was busy teaching a photographer how to say Magnolia Bluff like she was born here. I baked 48 mini pecan pies and tied raffia around mason jars, because apparently my generation must be the glue that holds Pinterest together. The first time Sloane came over to my house, she wrinkled her nose at my plaid couch and told me her brand was Whitford and Wicker, which sounded like a law firm for wicker chairs. She kissed my cheek with lips that smelled like vanilla and said, "We're going to bring you into the 21st century, Nora. It's going to be a glow-up." Sloane's mother, Pamela, has mastered the art of a smile that feels like a backhand. She wears diamonds that flash like hazard lights and says things like, "I raised my girl to have standards," while looking at my ceiling fans like they'd personally failed her. You'll want to remember that vase in the bay window, beside the Boston fern. You'll also want to remember the little bright bubble by the rim, not even the size of a ladybug, that caught the sun sometimes, like it got it faster than the rest of us. I didn't know it then, but that bubble would matter. In late January, with the azaleas thinking about waking up, and Magnolia Bluff half covered in pollen and hope, Sloane called me, with her voice pitched to a chirp you reserve for the weather and bad news. "Nora, honey, remember how I've been partnering with Devereaux Home and Garden? They're doing a charity home tour to benefit Riverbend Children's, and guess whose house they want to use as the Magnolia Bluff chapter showpiece?" "I assume not the mayor's," I said, trying not to sound like a woman who had been watering her plants in pajama pants. "Yours," she sang, like she was telling me I'd won a cruise. "It's perfect. Historic bones. Great light. We'll gut it, metaphorically, and make it an aspirational example of how the old and the new can live together." And I should have said no. The teacher in me always says yes to the kids, to the community, to the bake sale and the play and the fundraiser, where you stand there with a clipboard pretending to be official while you do math in your head about whether you can afford to donate. Raising money for a children's hospital? In my house? How could I say no? And maybe, though I didn't admit it to myself then, I wanted to be useful to them. Grant had been a quiet kid, a little allergic to eye contact unless he had a soccer ball in front of him. He'd somehow become a software product manager at a company called Seaport Systems, and I still wasn't sure what that meant, except he came home tired and talked about sprints, like he was still running track. I missed being the center a little bit. You can both be proud and miss. "There are rules," I said. "You can't throw out my things." "We'll only donate what you approve," Sloane said so fast I might have missed the comma. "It will be a collaboration." I've been around the block enough times to know that word. Collaboration translated to, "It's my way, but you'll feel heard." We had coffee with the representative from Devereaux Home and Garden, a young woman with very straight bangs named Tessa, who used Polaroid cameras in a way that suggested she didn't know there had been a version before the word vintage attached itself to it. She slid a thick packet across my kitchen table, full of glossy mock-ups and mood boards, and words like coastal minimalism and romantic airy neutrals. I could practically hear my plaid couch forking its own path to the curb. "I insist we include a clause," I said, my finger on the contract, where the owner consent bit wore a weak font like it was embarrassed. "No family heirlooms or personal items leave this house, and nothing can be donated or consigned without my written approval. Tessa's smile put on its brakes. Of course. Sloane rolled her eyes. We're not monsters. I initialed that clause so hard the paper creased. Remember that. It's the kind of memory you stand under later when everything else feels like rain. The first uneasy sign came the next afternoon. I came home from the farmer's market with a bag of satsumas and a bouquet of cheap tulips for my kitchen sink. I could hear music, the kind of music that sounds like it took itself too seriously to include a guitar, and laughter. In my living room, a tall man in an immaculate white t-shirt was standing where my bookshelf used to be, measuring the wall. He had a tape measure clipped to his jeans with a gold carabiner and a haircut that made him look like he'd lost a bet. "Ryder," he said, offering a hand he clearly moisturized. "Stager." Sloane had brought him and 3 women called assistants who seemed to have been paid in cappuccinos. There were bins lined up in my hallway with labels on them like keep, donate, and trash. And the trash bin was already brimming with my high school art show posters and the marching band photo where Grant was scowling behind his trumpet like somebody had put broccoli in his reed case. "Excuse me," I said, and moved past them to the bay window. The vase stood where it always had. The light inside it blew like a secret. Sloane's camera lens was hanging around her neck like a pendant. She had the vase in frame. She did not touch it. "That stays?" I said. "Of course," she said breezily. "We'll work around it." She did not roll her eyes, but I felt the eye roll in the air. That night, Daisy called. She and I talk like we're maintaining a ship. One's always checking for leaks while the other takes the helm. "You sure about this, Nell?" she asked, using Mama's old name for me as if maternal juju could be conjured by syllables. "I'm sure about Riverbend Children's," I said, and stared at the floral wallpaper like it had feelings. "And I'm sure that if I don't go along, I'll lose my son to a woman whose love language is being seen." Daisy sighed. "Call me when you need me to bring brownies and backup." The next few weeks were the longest group project of my life. I was directed to sit while other people lifted. I was told to look while other people decided. Sloane used phrases like, "We're leaning coastal," and "That's not the direction," and "Trust me, Nora." She'd get quiet when she didn't like something, and then, 5 minutes later, I'd find whatever that something was in the donate bin. Here are 3 moments that should have told me what was coming. 1. I reached for my father's old transistor radio, the one that always had a baseball game playing low on summer afternoons, and found it with a green sticker on top that said, "Estate." "Why does it say estate?" I asked, the weight of the thing familiar in my hands. "Oh, that's just how Palmetto and Pine sorts donations," Sloane said, breezy as a boat. "It's easier." Palmetto and Pine Interiors, the consignment store over on Bay Road that sells vintage bamboo, side tables for $2,000, and bookshelves by the foot. Remember that name. 2. I watched Ryder crouch in front of the vase and take a photo so close I could see the little bubble near the rim on his camera screen. He zoomed in, zoomed out, checked the angle with his hands. "Photogenic," he said. He looked like he wanted to try the word on in a selfie. 3. I found a screenshot on my iPad, not snooping. It pinged because my iCloud decided to make my life a foyer, and it was a message from Sloane to someone named R. "What do you think of this blue thing? Would it fetch 8K? 10? It's hideous, but probably old." The picture was my vase. I showed the message to Grant. He looked down at his phone and then up at me, his eyes doing that narrow thing people do when they're trying to calibrate who's being unfair. "Mum, she shops at consignment stores. She asks her stager friends what things are worth. It doesn't mean she's trying to take your stuff. She has labelled my father's radio estate, I said. As in, someone died. He exhaled. It sounded like a man pressing a truce into a conversation. It's a design term, he said. They start small, these things. Like a thread on your sweater you think you can just snip. Then you look down, and it's unravelling. 2 mornings later, I came down to the living room to find Sloane in trendy workout leggings that looked painted on, stretching her calves against my baseboard. She had a banana in one hand and a phone open in the other. "We're doing a giveaway with a rug company," she said. "Do you mind if we take a few photos here? Your light is better." That is how, on the internet, 1,000 people watched my daughter-in-law dance on my old Persian while texting link in bio. While I was chewing on a thing I couldn't name, my real trouble arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 3, the hour when the light comes in, low and golden, and even the dust feels expensive. I'd just arranged a bunch of gardenias in the vase. Yes, I put water in it. No, I didn't mind. Objects should be used unless they tell you otherwise. When Pamela strode into my house without knocking. Her heels clicked on the wood like fingernails on a countertop. "Sloane has a migraine," she announced, as if the entire house were a patient. "I'm here to steer the ship." "She's welcome to lay down," I said, not looking up from the gardenias, because I'm old enough to know that's how you win a small battle. "We're in no condition to host the sponsors' dinner tonight," Pamela said. "So I'm thinking we'll move it to the show space downtown." "We're hosting a sponsors' dinner?" I asked. News to me. Pamela smiled like I'd asked if water was wet. "Sloane's been carrying you on her back, Nora. You should try reading your emails." I did not slap her. I did not put my hands in the dirt and pray. I took a breath that made my ribs count themselves and said, "This is still my house." Which is why it hurt so particularly when, a day later, after all my bravado and righteous indignation, I walked into my living room and the bay window was just there, empty. It looked like a mouth missing a tooth. "Where's the vase?" I asked, and my voice was calm, the kind of calm I save for when a pot boils over and I take it off the burner and know it'll sizzle down. Sloane looked up from her laptop. She had a scrunchie around her wrist like a teenager. "Oh my God, Nora. I should have told you earlier. I am so sorry. Truly. When I was moving that plant stand, my elbow hit the dumb thing and it toppled." "Dumb thing," I repeated. Sometimes the words you say to the nearest person are really meant for yourself. Don't you dare cry in front of her. "It shattered," she said, her mouth making a sympathetic shape around the word. "A million pieces. We swept it up and it was like beach glass everywhere." "In this room?" I asked. I didn't see a scratch. "In the kitchen," she said too quickly, "near the pantry. That would make sense if the vase had walked." "Where are the pieces?" I asked. She blinked. "In the trash, Nora. The trash truck came and took it. You'd already left for the grocery store." I am not a woman who sprints, not anymore, but something old and teenage in me snapped its braces and ran. I went barefoot down Live Oak Street like a fool, my hair falling out of its clip, and flagged down the city crew 2 blocks away, where they were emptying my neighbour's bins. "Did you come for my trash?" I shouted, out of breath and out of pride. The man in green pants and kind eyes looked at me like I was the emergency I felt like. "Mom, our route hasn't hit your block yet. We're still on Pine." I walked back up my street with my hands shaking. My knees had that thin feeling you get when you stand too fast. On my porch, I held the railing and breathed. Remember this detail. The trash truck hadn't come yet. It matters. When I went back inside, Pamela was by the sink with a hand on her heart, like she'd just heard a hymn. "It's not good for your blood pressure to run like that," she said. "Where are the pieces?" I asked again, and in my voice was a command that made both of them pause. Sloane glanced at the trash can. It was empty. "Pam, didn't you—" "Grant took out the garbage," Pamela said smoothly. "He had a big bag. You must have missed him." I have lived long enough to know when a lie is a performance, and in that kitchen that afternoon, with the smell of disinfectant and the lemon oil I use on the counters, I watched a scene rehearsed in real time. The only props were my willingness to be bad at math and my desire to love them anyway. It was a bad couple of days. Grant told me gently I should stay with Daisy for a week, while they refinish the floors. He said the fumes would get to me. He said I deserved a break. He said he was so excited about what Sloane was doing for me. "You'll love it," he said, in that voice of a man who has been told what is good for him and repeated it enough times to make it feel like his own idea. At Daisy's, I slept in a room that smelled like lavender and old quilts. She made me tea with honey and didn't fill the silence with advice. "Where are the pieces?" she said to the air while we watched The Voice, like we were the kind of women who have opinions about covers of Fleetwood Mac songs. If she swept it up, there should be a bag of memories somewhere. The next morning, my phone lit up with a notification, a new message on the iPad that still thought it belonged to my house, although it had gone with me to Daisy's months ago when I wanted to listen to podcasts in the garden. I glanced at it for a second, and then looked again. "Ryder. Got it to P&P, need you to do the consignment form. I used Marigold Interiors LLC, like always. Sloane. Do not put my name. Anonymous donor box is fine. Ryder. And if she asks? Sloane. It broke. She likes to cry. It makes her feel important." I put the phone down. My hands went cold in that way that feels like knowing. I walked into Daisy's little blue and white kitchen, made myself a glass of water, and drank it while looking at the back fence. She didn't ask. She just put her hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Remember that clause," I said. I went home before noon. Nobody else was there. The house smelled faintly of paint. The walls looked naked in a way that made me want to wrap them in blankets. The bay window looked back at me like a friend who had cut her hair without asking me first. I went straight to the front porch and unscrewed the housing of the floodlight camera my nephew had insisted I get last year. "Everybody's package thief is cute until it's your blood pressure," he'd said. On the tiny screen, I saw everything my house had seen the night before. 2 figures, the range of my motion light, the curve of the vase. The footage wasn't spectacular. It didn't have good angles. It had truth. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor that keeps you humble, I got an answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. A woman named Talia from Coastal View News called me back. Talia was one of my former students who used to sit in the back of my classroom and draw shoes with wings. Now her voice was steady and sharp. "Ms. Callahan, it's Talia Benton." I hadn't left her a message, but I'd texted her, and what I'd sent was simple. "How do you report stolen art?" She didn't accidentally say the FBI on a public call. She didn't tell me to confront my daughter-in-law in the driveway with a rolling pin, although that did cross my mind twice between noon and 2. She said, "Come by the station with copies of the video and your contract. Bring any photos of the vase, any documentation. We'll call someone together." I called the number Talia gave me. FBI Art Crime Team sounded like a plot line until a man named Special Agent Avery Knox called me back and spoke with a drawl like he'd been born under a magnolia tree. and a caution like he'd watched too many people blow up their own lives, trying to set theirs on fire to keep other people warm. "Do not confront her," he said. "Do not announce you know. Preserve your evidence. We will work with the local detectives." Detective Mariah Ricks from the Magnolia Bluff Police Department was younger than the coffee she drank. She came to my house with a notebook, wrote down names, copied the contract clause, and watched the video 3 times, the way you watch a recipe go wrong, looking for where the egg separated from the batter. "We'll need a warrant to recover anything at Palmetto and Pine," she said. "But that form you have, that text, the anonymous donor thing, if we can tie that to Ms. Whitford Callahan or her associate, that's fraudulent transfer of property. The item is yours." She glanced at the screen. "And it will help your case that there's no trash pickup in that video. The lie will do some of the work for you. You think the best part of getting older is no longer caring what other people think. That's a lie we tell ourselves to feel superior to the young. The truth is, the best part of getting older is knowing when to keep your mouth shut and when to open it so wide the words come out like a siren. I kept my mouth shut. I called the Low Country Museum of Art and asked for the curator. Dr. Lena Ortiz met me the next day. She's the kind of woman who looks at things in a way that makes you feel like you've been protecting them for a reason. I showed her photos of the vase over the years, the way my mother had set it on a lace doily in 1982, the way Jack had balanced a lemon in it as a joke in 1991, the way Grant had used it as a stand for a science fair placard in 1999, and I had nearly lost my mind. "It looks like a Qianlong period porcelain," she said gently, flipping through my old Polaroids like tarot cards. "If it's what I think it is. The enameling, the kiln bubble you mentioned, the poem on the base. Did it have a poem?" I closed my eyes and saw the base. Blue marks like water. "Characters," I said. "My mother used to trace them with her pinky when she dusted." Dr. Ortiz made a sound like delight anchored by restraint. "I want to be careful, Ms. Callahan. There is a slim chance this is an exceptionally rare piece, Yankai enamels. There have been 8-figure auction results in the last decade for similar vases, but we do this right. We verify. We work with law enforcement. We don't tell the internet." "I can bake banana bread," I said helplessly. "That? And—" she smiled. "Let me call a colleague at the Atlantic Institute of Asian Art, quietly. Here is what we did not do. We did not march into Palmetto and Pine interiors and throw our bodies across the counter. We did not write a Facebook post that used the words steel and snake and then wonder why lawyers called. We did not drag Sloane across the coals of my group text like a piece of bad fish. Here is what we did. Dr. Ortiz came by my house on a Monday morning with a man wearing glasses that made him look like math. His name was Professor Kenji Matsuda, and he ran his fingers around the rim of the vase in my photos like he could feel it through the paper. He nodded. He said things like, "Bats symbolizing happiness, peaches longevity," and "The iron red outlining is exquisite," and "Your mother had excellent taste." He advised me to do what the detective said. Wait. Waiting is not my spiritual gift. Sloane texted me photos of light fixtures and asked my opinion while she was consigning my years onto a form. Pamela stopped by with a pair of drapes as a peace offering and an energy that said if she were in charge of the Peace Corps, we'd all be peeling potatoes by 9 a.m. sharp. That week, Sloane hosted a sponsor dinner at a show space downtown where she did not invite me. I saw photos later, her in a white blazer, Grant at her side looking like a column, and behind them a poster of my house with the words, "The Whitford Touch," in a font that made my left eye twitch. A day after that, Detective Ricks called. "We served a warrant this morning at Palmetto and Pine," she said. "They were not pleased. Guess what we found?" I sat down on my porch steps without remembering to look first for pollen. "Please tell me it isn't a bunch of shoes." "A powder blue vase," she said, "covered in vellum and tucked into a back storage area with a sign on the shelf that said, 'On hold, anonymous donor.' The consignment form listed Marigold Interiors LLC with an address that traces to a P.O. box in town. We have the surveillance footage of the drop-off. It shows Ms. Whitford Callahan's associate." "What about Sloane?" I asked. "It's a funny thing, the heart. It wants to believe that the person you love is just near the bad thing, not breathing it in." "Text message records suggest she coordinated," Detective Ricks said gently. "We've got probable cause, but I think Ms. Whitford Callahan believes she'll sell this out of state. They were communicating with a buyer in Miami. That's where federal comes in. We'd like to stage the recovery." The phrase "stage the recovery" sounds like a play where instead of a curtain, there's just real life. The plan was simple in the way a recipe with 5 ingredients can be simple and still require a surgeon's hand. We'd proceed with the charity showhouse event as scheduled. We'd bring the vase back into town quietly in the custody of law enforcement. We'd have Dr. Ortiz and Professor Matsuda on standby with authentication points. We'd show the donors, who included half the town's board membership and the man who owns the golf course, what had happened. We'd secure the house so nobody could slip away, and I would open my mouth at the right time. If you've ever been the only one in the room who knows something big and you're asked to wait, you know it feels like you swallowed a lightning bug. At rehearsal for the event, Sloane told me where I would sit. "Back row," she said, pointing to my own armchair, now reupholstered in fabric that cost more than the community theatre's prop budget. "You'll look cozy. Audience needs to see a journey." "My journey?" I asked, because sometimes I like to make people say the thing, if only to watch them hear themselves. "Our journey," she said, and kissed my cheek. "Lipstick is a weapon and a residue." The morning of the event dawned crisp and blue and smelled like sugar and sunblock, which is what money smells like when you put it on a patio. The rental companies had come and gone. There were white chairs on my lawn with bows as if they were being baptized. A banner hung across my porch. "Magnolia Bluff Home and Garden Tour, benefiting Riverbend Children's." That part was true. If this story has a villain, it isn't the kids. In my kitchen, it didn't feel like mine, but I recognized the hum of my refrigerator the way a mother recognizes a child's footfall. I watched the caterers arrange cups, the interns fuss with the AV screen, and the Devereaux woman, Tessa, hustle through a seating chart like it was the map to a better life. She looked at me like I had wandered onto a set without a costume. "You look great, Nora," she said. "Maybe a jacket? Something less beige?" "It's ivory," I said. Outside, in a black SUV, Detective Ricks and 2 officers waited with the vase in a foam-lined crate. I never saw it. Not then. It was all chain of custody, and we need to keep it sealed, Ms. Callahan. Agent Knox stood at the back of the yard with sunglasses and a face that didn't flinch. Dr. Ortiz arrived in a cardigan that had seen better days and a smile that made my shoulders drop a little. "If we pull this off," she whispered, "I will bring my mother's empanadas over for you and Daisy." "You're on," I said, and then it was time. Sloane took the mic with a click of her heels on my floor. The donors hushed. The cameras from Coastal View News hummed like happy bees. Pamela perched on the edge of a chair like an antique of her own. Grant swallowed hard and straightened his tie. "And it's not just about taste, y'all," Sloane said, striking the tone of a woman who thinks she's a TED Talk. It's about letting go of the past. She looked at me then, a quick glance, almost soft, as if to say, I can make you look good if you let me. She held a gift bag up like a trophy. To show Nora what it looks like to start fresh, I brought a little something. She reached in, and with a flourish that must have looked charming on her Instagram stories, she pulled out a glossy white ceramic vase with a bowl. It had no weight, no age, no story. It was manufactured perfection. The room made a sound that I could write as "oh" if this was a script. It wasn't. This was real. I stood up. My body knew before my brain did, and somewhere inside my knee told the other knee, we can do this. And I did not worry about my shoes or my words, or whether my hair had fallen into its own ideas about shape. Play the video, I said. There are two kinds of silence. There's the kind that exists before music, and there's the kind that happens after somebody tells the truth. This was the second kind. You've seen the footage in your mind already. My driveway at 2:13 a.m., Ryder hoisting the vase like it weighed nothing, his mouth moving. Sloane's face clear enough to recognize her own ambition in it, the Range Rover's back hatch closing, the plate number, distinct and useless until it wasn't. Then the cut to the consignment store's back door, midnight, Ryder wheeling a dolly with the vase swaddled like a baby that doesn't belong to him, the form. Marigold Interiors LLC. The signature. It wasn't Sloane's. It belonged to a woman I didn't know yet, but would. Pamela's Pilates friend, who'd rented them a P.O. box. Sloane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The small crack in her smile became a fault line. Agent Knox took off his sunglasses. The ushers, that's what they called them when they hired boys from the college to stand by the stage, moved aside as Detective Ricks walked in with two uniformed officers. Ryder, at the back of the room, tried very hard to be the kind of person whose phone rang just then. Can we ever forgive the reflex to flee? But one of the ushers put a hand on his chest. Pamela stood up and said, too loud, "You will regret this," which is a sentence that ages nobody well. The crate came in then, beautifully ugly in its utilitarian way, because there are moments when function tells you who your friends are. Detective Ricks signed the chain of custody form like she was writing a love letter to due process. Dr. Ortiz stood on one side, Professor Matsuda on the other, and when they lifted the lid, there was a hush like a church. The vase sat there like it had all along. It did not care about our politics or our pettiness. Its colours were dreamy and precise. A puzzle worked to completion by hands and heat. The little bubble by the rim caught the rental chandelier light and winked. My mouth made a sound I had not made since the first time Grant said "Mama," and knew he meant me. Dr. Ortiz cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing is an 18th century porcelain vase, likely from the Qianlong period. Preliminary evaluation suggests it is exceptionally rare. The last time a similar piece went to auction, the hammer price. Well, she smiled at me. It would pay for a lot of kids' braces. Sloane's face, in that moment, did a thing I had not seen it do. It softened. It got small. She looked at Grant, and for a second, I saw a scared girl, not a brand. The crowd, which had been ready to toast her glow-up, turned. The sound that moved through them wasn't a gasp. It was a shifting of allegiance. Agent Knox stepped forward. Ms. Whitford Callahan, Mr. Keene, you're under arrest for grand larceny and possession of stolen goods. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The words felt like a TV show until they were happening in my living room in front of my fern. Pamela lunged. Not physically, socially. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice turning syrup. "A family matter. We'll write a check." "Ma'am," Detective Ricks said. "No." Grant had to choose. You could see it in his jaw. He glanced at me and I lifted my chin. Not noble, not a plea. Permission. He tucked his hands into his pockets like a boy and looked at his wife. "Sloane," he said, and that's when she broke. She started to cry. Hard. The kind of hard that makes mothers from 2 rows back stand and reach for a tissue that doesn't exist. "It was supposed to be a flip," she said through huge, awful breaths, because when people practice their lies, they rarely practice how to cry. Everyone does it. She has so much stuff. She gestured at my house like it had harmed her. "We needed the money for the event, for my launches, for—" She looked at Pamela then, and it was a look that could be sold as a cautionary tale in department stores. "You said nobody would miss it." I had to sit down then, because there is a limit to the blood pressure a woman my age can manage. The officers read them their rights. Sloane put her hands out like she was resigned to having them tied with a ribbon. Ryder got small, that stager's bravado oozing out of him like air from a balloon. Pamela stood absolutely still in a way that made me think of rattlesnakes. They took them away through the kitchen, and the donors, in a collective moment of trying to reconcile their desire to do good with their desire to stay unassociated with disaster, clapped, terribly, for Agent Knox. Tessa from Devereux looked like she had eaten a can of hairspray. "We had no idea," she said to me, but mostly to the cameras. "This is terrible. We stand with Ms. Callahan." The rest of the event moved forward, like a person determined to make it to the end of the race because they said they would. The band played. The caterer ladled bisque. The microphones were turned up and then forgotten. People pressed my hand and said, "So brave," like I had done something other than love my home. That afternoon, when it quieted and the interns had taken down the banner and the chairs had gone back to the truck like accusations, Grant came to the back porch where I sat with Daisy. He looked older. You can age in a day when the world asks you to look at it without the filters. "Mum," he said, and then didn't speak for a moment, and Daisy took that as her cue to stand and go inside and check on tea, which is what sisters do when forgiveness needs air. "I'm sorry," he said, and he cried. And my son is not a crier. He cried like he had just remembered he had a mother before he had a wife. And the two did not need to be in competition, but somehow had been. "She told me you were trying to control me," he said. "She said you wanted credit for everything we built. She said you'd rather keep a house museum than let us have a life." "I don't want credit," I said. "I want my things respected. I want my boundaries respected. And I want my son." We sat there for a long time, the way you can when the day has been big enough to demand silence. The crickets tuned themselves up. The police cars at the end of the street rolled away, and normal came back like a dog sniffing out home. Over the next week, fallout fell like branches in a storm. Palmetto and Pine Interiors issued a statement that read like a note from a 6th grader who'd copied his homework. The owner, a man who wore khakis like a costume, was charged with receiving stolen property. Ryder was arraigned. Pamela hired a lawyer whose cufflinks cost more than my first car. Sloane posted a Notes app apology on her Instagram that said, "I'm learning," 15 times, and named a therapist once, and failed to mention the words, "I did this." And then, because the universe can't resist a theme, 2 women I didn't know knocked on my door. One had sunspots the shape of Florida on her forearm. The other wore a baseball cap, low. "Ms. Callahan?" Florida asked. "We saw the coverage. Can we talk to Detective Ricks? We think Sloane took things from our mother's house when she did her consult and sold them at P&P. There are so many small crimes happening while we look away. Coastal View News ran a story. Talia did her hair different than I remembered, but her voice had the same steady kindness. Magnolia Bluff woman recovers rare vase. The headline read, Charity makeover leads to felony theft charges. Agent Knox briefed the press in sentences that contained the words, in the course of an ongoing investigation. The Atlantic Institute of Asian Art sent a letter to Dr. Ortiz saying they'd like to examine the vase when the case closed, and then they put in a number beneath that sentence that made me lie down on my couch and stare at the ceiling. 12 million was their estimate based on similar sales. $12 million for a thing my mother had bought for $20 because she liked the way gardenias looked in it. What are you going to do? Daisy asked, as we ate takeout from our favourite place, Noodles doing the work of therapy. I'm not cashing out my soul, I said, but I didn't survive teaching teenagers for 32 years to end up broke out of principal. We worked with a lawyer who didn't make me feel stupid. We worked with Dr. Ortiz, who did not actually have to bring the empanadas because she had brought me back something I didn't know I was missing, a sense that institutions can occasionally help. We worked with Agent Knox, who told me what I could say and when. The case moved. Sloane was indicted. Ryder took a plea. Palmetto and Pine changed its window display to fake ferns and quiet. One morning, I went to the Low Country Museum, and the vase sat in a glass case like a bride. Dr. Ortiz had taken the kind of care white gloves are made for. The label said, Powder Blue Yankai Vase, mid-18th century, gift of the Callahan family, on loan from the Callahan Foundation. I had to sit on a bench. The man next to me said, Beautiful? And I said, She hated it? Meaning Sloane, and then laughed so hard the guard glanced over. Yes, we established a foundation, which is a sentence I never thought would be about me. I sold a partial interest in the vase to the Institute, retained some rights, and the funds go in part to Riverbend Children's and in part to art scholarships for Magnolia Bluff High. You can teach art for 3 decades and still watch the Kiln Fund get cut first when the budget gets tight. Not anymore. Grant moved into a furnished month-to-month and then into a little saltbox house over near the marsh. He brings me coffee on Saturdays now and does not text before he comes because he knows the difference between surprise and intrusion. He filed for legal separation from Sloane, who posted a carousel on Instagram about putting herself first that made my sister text me a gif of a woman rolling her eyes so hard I worried she'd need a chiropractor. Do I pity her? Sometimes. I think greed is a disease with a prettier wardrobe, but I don't have time to babysit other people's lessons. I've got hydrangeas to deadhead and teenagers to endow and a front porch to sit on with the knowledge that I insisted on the right clause. On a Sunday in May, Daisy and I hosted an art class on my back patio for 6 little girls from the neighborhood who wanted to paint, but whose parents both worked 2 jobs and who deserved a Saturday morning that smelled like acrylic and scones. We painted peaches, we painted bats. When one of them looked up at me with paint on her nose and said, Mrs. Callahan, can I make it blue? I said, Honey, you make it whatever color your happy looks like. She grinned, spread the blue thick, and the light caught a little bubble near the rim of her plastic cup. Months later, Magnolia Bluff's board asked if I would say a few words at the museum for a gala celebrating art in the Low Country. I wore a dress I'd had for 10 years and my mother's pearls. Dr. Ortiz introduced me like I'd invented clay. The room applauded before I said anything, which is a kindness we should extend more often. I started with the truth. My name is Nora, I said. I spent 32 years teaching teenagers that art isn't about perfection. It's about looking and loving. I'm here because I looked at a vase and loved it, and then I didn't look closely enough at the person who had hurt me. I'm not here to thank a thief for showing me my strength. I was strong already. I'm here to thank a community that decided the right thing was worth the fuss. At the end of the night, Grant hugged me. Daisy handed me my coat. Dr. Ortiz pressed a small paper bag into my hand. Inside, empanadas, true to her word. Agent Knox nodded at me once, a man who didn't need words to say, "We did okay." Back home on Live Oak Street, I put the bag on the counter and stood by the bay window. A cheap white ceramic vase sat there now, the one Sloane had brandished. I kept it on purpose. It holds grocery store tulips. The vase at the museum holds praise and money and a piece of my mother's stubbornness. The cheap one holds water and reminds me I can love something without needing it to be priceless. If this story resonated, tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've got your own family saga or community story, share it in the comments. Your voice matters here. In the end, it wasn't about being right. It was about insisting on respect and letting the truth do what it does best. Walk into a room and turn on the light,